Ethan Donovan never thought his father's idea of a life lesson would start with him sleeping on a cardboard mat in an alley. The cold concrete seeped through the thin cardboard, chilling him to the bone. A nearby streetlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the brick walls that hemmed him in. He shifted, trying to find a comfortable position, but the hard ground offered no reprieve. The stench of rotting garbage and urine assaulted his nostrils, a stark contrast to the designer cologne he usually wore. Ethan pulled his tattered jacket tighter around his shoulders, shivering as a gust of wind whistled through the alley. "This is insane," he muttered, glancing at his bare wrist where his Rolex usually sat. Dad's lost his mind. The events of the past week replayed in his mind. His father's stern face, disappointment etched in every line as he laid out his ultimatum. "You've gone too far this time, Ethan," James Donovan had said, his voice low and controlled. "The DUI, the property damage, the complete disregard for others. It ends now." Ethan had scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Come on, Dad. It's not like anyone got hurt. I'll pay for the damages." That's exactly the problem. James slammed his fist on the desk, making Ethan jump. "You think money solves everything. You have no idea what real struggle is." "And you do." Ethan shot back. "Mr. Self-Made Millionaire?" James's eyes had hardened then, a flicker of something. Pain? Regret? Passing across his face. "You're going to learn, son. 1 week on the streets. No money, no phone, no connections. Just you and the real world." Ethan had laughed, thinking it was a joke. But here he was 3 days in, and the reality of his situation was sinking in like the chill in his bones. A scuffling sound nearby made him bolt upright. His heart raced as he peered into the shadows, half expecting to see a rat. Instead, a figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scraggly beard and eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. "Well, well," the man's gravelly voice sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. "What do we have here? A fresh face in our little slice of paradise." Ethan scrambled to his feet, backing away. "I don't want any trouble." The man chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Trouble? Son, trouble's all we got down here." He stepped closer, and Ethan could smell the mix of sweat and alcohol on his breath. "But maybe you've got something to make it worth my while." Ethan's back hit the wall. He glanced left and right, looking for an escape route. "I don't have anything. Please, just leave me alone." The man's hand shot out, grabbing Ethan's jacket. "Let's see about that, shall we?" "Hey." A new voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Back off, Ricky. The kid's with me." Ethan's assailant, Ricky, released him immediately, turning to face the newcomer. "Carl, since when do you take in strays?" The man, called Carl, stepped into the light. He was older, with graying hair and a weathered face, but his stance was that of a soldier, straight-backed and imposing. "Since now, go sleep it off, Ricky. You're better than this." Ricky hesitated, then nodded, shuffling away into the darkness. Carl turned to Ethan, his piercing blue eyes seeming to look right through him. "You okay, kid?" Ethan nodded, his heart still pounding. "Yeah, thanks." Carl grunted, gesturing for Ethan to follow him. "Come on, it's not safe here. I know a better spot." As they walked, Ethan studied Carl's profile. There was something familiar about him, but he couldn't quite place it. They rounded a corner, coming to a small encampment tucked away behind an abandoned building. A fire burned in a metal drum, casting a warm glow over the makeshift shelters. "Carl," a woman's voice called out. "Where have you been? I was starting to worry." A petite woman with dark hair, pulled back in a messy bun, emerged from one of the shelters. Her eyes widened as she saw Ethan. "Who's this?" Carl shrugged. "Found him in Ricky's territory. Figured he could use some help." The woman's face softened. "Of course. I'm Maya." She held out her hand, and Ethan shook it, surprised by the strength in her grip. "Ethan," he mumbled, suddenly feeling out of place. A small head poked out from behind Maya's legs. "Mommy, who's that?" Maya smiled, running her hand through the little girl's hair. "This is Ethan, sweetie. He's going to stay with us for a bit." The girl, no more than 6 or 7, stepped forward, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I'm Ella. Do you like stories? Carl tells the best stories." Ethan found himself smiling despite his exhaustion. "I do like stories. Maybe Carl can tell us one." Carl chuckled, settling down by the fire. All right. But first, let's get some food in you. You look like you haven't eaten in days." As they shared a meager meal of canned beans and stale bread, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude for the kindness of these strangers, shame at his own privilege, and a gnawing fear of what the coming days would bring. Carl's voice broke through his thoughts. "So, Ethan, what brings a guy like you to our neck of the woods?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's complicated. My father thought I needed a lesson in humility." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Some lesson? Throwing you out on the streets." "It's only for a week," Ethan admitted, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "I know it sounds crazy, but nothing." Carl interrupted. "A week out here? You're lucky to have survived this long." Ethan bristled at the implication. "I can handle myself." Carl's eyes narrowed. "Can you tell me, kid, what would you have done if I hadn't shown up tonight?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan looked away, unable to meet Carl's gaze. "That's what I thought," Carl said softly. "Listen, Ethan, I don't know what game your father's playing, but out here, it's not about proving a point. It's about survival." Maya nodded, pulling Ella closer. "Every day is a struggle. Finding food, staying safe, keeping warm. It's not something you can understand in a week." Ethan felt a surge of defensiveness. "I'm not completely helpless. I've had survival training." Carl barked out a laugh. "Survival training? Boy, this ain't no camping trip. Out here, the rules are different. The people are different." As if to prove his point, a commotion erupted from nearby. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass echoed through the night. Carl was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between the noise and the group. "Maya, take Ella and Ethan to the back. Stay quiet." Maya nodded, grabbing Ella's hand and motioning for Ethan to follow. They huddled in the shadows, listening as the sounds grew closer. "What's happening?" Ethan whispered. Maya's voice was tense. "Probably the jackals. They've been getting bolder lately." "The jackals? A gang. They prey on the weak, steal what little we have." Maya's grip on Ella tightened. "Carl's been keeping them at bay, but—" Her words trailed off as footsteps approached. Ethan's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He'd been in fights before, but always with the safety net of his wealth and connections. Here, in this dark corner of the city, he felt truly vulnerable for the first time in his life. Carl's voice rang out, firm and unwavering. "This isn't your territory, boys. Turn around and walk away." A younger, more aggressive voice responded. "Oh yeah, old man. And who's gonna make us?" The tension in the air was palpable. Ethan held his breath, straining to hear what was happening. Suddenly, there was a flurry of movement, the sound of fists connecting with flesh, and grunts of pain. Before he could think, Ethan was on his feet, rushing towards the commotion. He emerged from the shelter to see Carl grappling with 2 men, while a third circled, looking for an opening. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, drawing their attention. "Leave him alone." The circling man turned, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Well, looks like we've got a hero." Ethan's mind raced, searching for a way out of this mess he'd stumbled into. He glanced around, spotting a length of pipe lying nearby. In one fluid motion, he scooped up, brandishing it like a weapon. "I said leave him alone." The man lunged, and Ethan swung, connecting with a satisfying thud. The attacker stumbled back, clutching his arm. Carl used the distraction to gain the upper hand, knocking one of his assailants to the ground. The fight was over almost as quickly as it had begun. The jackals, outmatched and caught off guard, retreated into the night, leaving Carl and Ethan standing breathless in the flickering firelight. Carl turned to Ethan, a mix of anger and grudging respect in his eyes. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Ethan dropped the pipe, his hands shaking. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of Carl's mouth. Maybe there's hope for you yet, kid. As the adrenaline faded, Ethan felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He sank to the ground, his mind reeling from the events of the night. Maya emerged from the shelter, Ella clinging to her side. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carl nodded, his eyes never leaving Ethan. "For now, but they'll be back." Ethan looked up, meeting Carl's gaze. "What do we do?" The older man's expression softened slightly. "We survive. That's all any of us can do out here." As the group settled back around the fire, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. He'd come into this expecting a simple lesson in humility. Instead, he found himself thrust into a world he barely understood, with people who seemed to know far more than they let on. Carl pulled something from his pocket, a battered old wallet. As he flipped it open, a photograph fluttered to the ground. Ethan reached to pick it up, freezing as he caught sight of the image. There, in faded color, was a family portrait, and at the center, a man who looked eerily like his father. He looked up at Carl, questions forming on his lips, but the older man quickly snatched the photo away, tucking it back into his wallet with a guarded expression. "Get some rest, kid," Carl said gruffly. "Tomorrow's another day, and out here you never know what it might bring." As Ethan lay down on his makeshift bed, his mind raced with unanswered questions. Was Carl really? And what connection did he have to the Donovan family? One thing was certain. This week on the streets was going to be far more than the simple lesson his father had intended. The sky wept, its tears pelting the city with a relentless fury. Ethan huddled beneath a flimsy awning, his sodden clothes clinging to his shivering frame. For days into his week-long ordeal, and Mother Nature seemed determined to test his resolve. Carl appeared beside him, a ghost materializing from the misty downpour. "Weather's turning nasty. We need to find better shelter." Ethan nodded, his teeth chattering. "Where?" "There's a place. Not far, but it won't be easy." They set off, battling against the wind and rain. Ethan's feet, blistered and raw, protested with each step. The streets, usually teeming with life, stood eerily empty. Only the desperate and the destitute braved this tempest. As they rounded a corner, a hulking structure loomed before them. The abandoned factory's broken windows gaped like jagged teeth, ready to devour the unwary. Carl gestured toward a rusted side door. "In here. Watch your step." The interior was a labyrinth of shadows and decay. Water dripped from the ceiling, creating a discordant symphony that echoed through the vast space. Ethan stumbled, his foot catching on a piece of debris. "Careful." Carl steadied him. "Place is full of hazards." They navigated through the gloom, finally reaching a secluded corner where a small group had gathered. Maya sat on a makeshift bed of pallets, Ella curled up beside her. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering light of a battery-powered lantern, were etched with weariness. Maya's eyes widened as she took in their bedraggled state. "You're soaked through. Here, take these." She thrust a bundle of threadbare blankets into Ethan's arms. As he wrapped himself in the rough fabric, a wave of gratitude washed over him. "Thank you," he murmured, the words feeling inadequate. Carl settled beside them, his weathered face creased with concern. "How's she doing?" Maya stroked Ella's hair, her voice barely above a whisper. "The cough's getting worse. I don't know what to do." Ethan felt a pang of helplessness. In his old life, a simple phone call would have summoned the best doctors money could buy. Here, in this desolate place, such luxuries were as distant as the stars. "I might know someone," Carl said, his tone cautious. "A doctor who sometimes helps out. No promises, but I'll see what I can do." As Carl disappeared into the shadows, Ethan found himself alone with Maya and Ella. The little girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Ethan." Her voice was small, fragile. "Will you tell me a story?" He hesitated, caught off guard by the simple request. I don't know many stories." Maya smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Make one up. That's what Carl does." Ethan took a deep breath, his mind racing. Once upon a time, there was a prince who lived in a golden tower. As he spun his tale, weaving elements of his own life into a fantastical narrative, Ethan felt something shift within him. The prince in his story, much like himself, had everything he could ever want, except understanding. It wasn't until he left his tower and lived among the people that he truly began to see the world. Ella listened, enraptured, her earlier discomfort momentarily forgotten. When Ethan finished, she clapped her hands. "That was wonderful. Do you think the prince ever went back to his tower?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. What do you think?" Ella's brow furrowed in concentration. "I think he did, but he was different. Better." Maya squeezed her daughter's hand. "That's a nice thought, sweetheart. Now, try to get some rest." As Ella drifted off to sleep, Maya turned to Ethan. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It was just a story. Sometimes, stories are all we have out here. They keep us going when nothing else will." The conversation lulled, and Ethan found his thoughts drifting to Carl. The mysterious photograph, the hints of a shared past with his father, it all swirled in his mind like the storm outside. Hours passed, the factory creaking and groaning around them. Carl hadn't returned, and worry gnawed at Ethan's gut. Just as he was about to suggest they search for him, a commotion erupted near the entrance. "You can't stay here." A gruff voice boomed. "This is our territory now." Ethan peered through the gloom, making out the shapes of several large men. Their leader, a hulking figure with a shaved head, advanced on a group of cowering homeless people. "Please," one of them begged, "just for tonight." The storm dashed. The leader's fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him sprawling. "I said, get out." Without thinking, Ethan surged to his feet. "Hey, leave them alone." The leader turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Ethan. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a hero." Ethan's heart raced, but he stood his ground. "There's room for everyone. You don't have to do this." The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You clearly don't understand how things work around here, pretty boy. So let me educate you." He lunged forward, his fist whistling through the air. Ethan ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow. His survival instincts, honed over the past few days, kicked in. He feinted left, then drove his shoulder into the man's midsection. The leader stumbled back, surprise flashing across his face. It quickly morphed into rage. "You're gonna regret that." What followed was a brutal dance of fists and fury. Ethan took as many hits as he landed, his body screaming in protest. But something had awakened within him, a fierce determination to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Just as his strength began to wane, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "That's enough." Carl emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding attention. The leader hesitated, recognition dawning in his eyes. "This isn't your fight, old man," he growled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Carl's eyes hardened. "It became my fight the moment you threatened these people. Now you have a choice. Leave peacefully, or things get ugly." For a tense moment, it seemed the leader might challenge Carl. But something in the older man's stance, a coiled readiness born of years on the streets, made him think twice. "Fine," he spat, "but this isn't over." As the intruders retreated, Ethan sagged against a nearby pillar, his body a canvas of bruises and cuts. Carl approached, concern etched on his weathered face. "That was either very brave or very stupid," he said, echoing his words from their first encounter. Ethan managed a weak smile. "Maybe a bit of both." Carl helped him back to their corner, where Maya waited with wide eyes. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Ethan insisted, though every movement sent jolts of pain through his body. "Just a little misunderstanding." Carl snorted. "A little misunderstanding that could have gotten you killed. You need to be more careful, kid. This isn't a game." Ethan's temper flared. "You think I don't know that? I'm trying my best here, Carl, but I can't just stand by and watch people get hurt." A strange expression crossed Carl's face, a mix of pride and something deeper, more complex. "No, I suppose you can't. You're more like your father than you realize." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the clues he'd gathered over the past few days. "How do you know my father?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Carl's shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had settled upon them. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicated," Ethan demanded. "I'm tired of secrets and half-truths. Who are you really?" For a long moment, Carl said nothing. Then, with a deep sigh, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the battered wallet. He handed it to Ethan, his hand trembling slightly. "Open it," he said. "Look at the photo. Really look at it." Ethan did as he was told, studying the faded image. His breath caught in his throat as recognition dawned. The man in the center, younger but unmistakable, was his father. And next to him, "That's you," Ethan whispered, his eyes darting between the photo and Carl's face. "But how?" Carl's voice was heavy with regret. "Because, Ethan, I'm your uncle, your father's brother." The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. He staggered back, his mind reeling. "But Dad said his brother died years ago." "He thinks I did," Carl admitted. "It was easier that way, for both of us." Questions tumbled from Ethan's lips, a torrent of confusion and disbelief. "Why? Why would you leave everything behind? Why live like this?" Carl's eyes grew distant, lost in memories. "Sometimes the weight of expectation becomes too much to bear. I couldn't be the person your grandfather wanted me to be, so I chose a different path." Ethan shook his head, struggling to process this new reality. "But all these years, you've been out here, watching us." A sad smile played at the corners of Carl's mouth. "Not always, but enough to know that you needed this wake-up call as much as I did all those years ago." The implications of Carl's words settled over Ethan like a heavy blanket. His mind raced with questions, with the potential consequences of this revelation. But before he could voice any of them, a commotion from across the factory floor drew their attention. Maya's panicked voice cut through the air. Ella, wake up." In an instant, the personal drama was forgotten. Ethan and Carl rushed to Maya's side, where Ella lay motionless, her breathing shallow and labored. "We need to get her to a hospital," Ethan said, his earlier injuries forgotten in the face of this new crisis. Carl nodded grimly. "I know a place, but it's risky. We'll be exposing ourselves." Ethan met his uncle's gaze, a newfound understanding passing between them. Some risks are worth taking. As they prepared to move Ella, the storm outside intensified, mirroring the turmoil in Ethan's heart. He realized that his journey was far from over. The lessons of the street, the revelation of his family's past, and the urgent need to save an innocent child, all of it swirled together, pushing him toward a crossroads he never saw coming. With one last look at the abandoned factory that had been their shelter, Ethan stepped out into the raging storm, carrying Ella in his arms. Whatever came next, he knew he was no longer the same person who had started this journey just a few days ago. The rain pelted his face, washing away the last vestiges of his old self. As they made their way through the deserted streets, Ethan silently vowed to face whatever challenges lay ahead, not as the privileged son of James Donovan, but as someone who had glimpsed the harsh realities of a world he once ignored. The city's underbelly pulsed with a feverish energy as dawn broke on Ethan's 6th day on the streets. His clothes, once pristine, now hung in tatters. His face, once smooth and unblemished, was a canvas of dirt and stubble. But it was his eyes that had changed the most, haunted, yet burning with a newfound determination. Ethan stumbled through the alleyways, his body racked with chills. The past few days had taken their toll, leaving him weak and disoriented. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that echoed off the brick walls. "Carl." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Maya, ella." Silence answered him. The makeshift camp where they'd sought refuge was empty, save for a few scattered belongings. Panic clawed at Ethan's chest. Where had they gone? Had something happened? A distant siren wailed, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his system. He needed to move, to find them, but each step was a monumental effort, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. As he rounded a corner, a familiar figure materialized from the shadows. Carl's weathered face was etched with concern. "Ethan, we've been looking everywhere for you." Relief flooded through him, quickly followed by a wave of dizziness. He swayed on his feet, and Carl rushed forward to steady him. "Whoa, easy there. You're burning up, kid." Ethan's mind swam, struggling to focus. "Maya, ella, where?" Carl's expression darkened. Ella's condition worsened. Maya took her to the free clinic on 5th. "I've been searching for you ever since." The words penetrated the fog in Ethan's brain. Ella, sick. The clinic. He needed to get there. "We have to go," he mumbled, trying to push past Carl. Carl's grip tightened. "You're in no condition to go anywhere. Let's get you someplace safe first." But Ethan shook his head, a stubborn set to his jaw. "No, Ella needs us. I promised I'd help." For a moment, Carl looked like he might argue. Then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. "All right, but you lean on me, you hear? We'll get there together." The journey to the clinic was a blur of pain and determination. Ethan's world narrowed to the rhythm of his feet on the pavement, Carl's steady presence beside him. Every step was an act of will, fueled by the image of Ella's innocent face. As they approached the clinic, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass. Ethan's heart raced as he recognized one of the voices, Maya. "Please, you have to help her. She's just a child." They rounded the corner to find Maya locked in a heated argument with a security guard. Ella lay limp in her arms, her small face flushed with fever. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but without proper identification or insurance." Ethan surged forward, his own illness forgotten. "What's going on here?" The guard turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in Ethan's disheveled appearance. "This doesn't concern you. Move along." But Ethan stood his ground, drawing himself up to his full height. In that moment, something of his old self, the entitled son of James Donovan, resurfaced. But now, it was tempered with a newfound empathy. This child needs medical attention, now. The guard's hand moved to his weapon. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time." "No, you listen." Ethan's voice cracked like a whip. "My name is Ethan Donovan. My father is James Donovan, CEO of Donovan Industries. If this child doesn't receive immediate care, I promise you'll be looking for a new job by sundown." A tense silence fell. The guard's eyes widened in recognition, darting between Ethan's face and his ragged appearance. Finally, he stepped aside. I'll get a doctor." As they rushed Ella into the clinic, Ethan felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Carl staring at him, an unreadable expression on his face. "That was quite a performance," Carl said softly. "Using your name like that." Ethan felt a flush of shame. "I had to do something." Carl nodded slowly. "I understand, but remember, out here, a name means nothing. It's your actions that define you." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but a wave of dizziness washed over him. The world tilted, and then everything went black. When Ethan came to, he found himself lying on a cot in a dimly lit room. The antiseptic smell of the clinic surrounded him. He blinked, trying to focus on the figure sitting beside him. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Carl's gruff voice was tinged with relief. Ethan struggled to sit up. Ella, Maya, are they? They're fine, Carl assured him. Ella's getting treatment. Maya's with her. A weight lifted from Ethan's chest. He sank back onto the cot, exhaustion seeping into his bones. What happened? Carl's expression grew serious. You collapsed. Turns out you've been running around with pneumonia. The doctor says you're lucky it didn't turn into something worse. Ethan absorbed this information, his mind racing. I didn't realize. I thought I was just tired. That's the thing about life out here, Carl said softly. You can't afford to ignore your body's warnings. Every ache, every pain could be the difference between survival and… He trailed off, but Ethan understood. The reality of life on the streets had never been clearer. A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Ethan gathered his courage. Carl, I need to ask you something. Carl's eyes met his, a flicker of apprehension crossing his weathered features. What is it? That photo in your wallet. The man. It's my father, isn't it? The air seemed to thicken. Carl's shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had settled upon them. I suppose there's no point in denying it anymore. Ethan's heart raced. Who are you? Really? Carl took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on some distant point. I'm your uncle, Ethan, your father's brother. The words hung in the air, a bombshell that shattered Ethan's already fragile world. But that's impossible. Dad said his brother died years ago. He thinks I did, Carl admitted. It was easier that way, for both of us. Ethan's mind reeled, struggling to process this revelation. Why? Why would you leave everything behind? Carl's eyes met his, filled with a lifetime of regret and resolve. Sometimes, the weight of expectation becomes too much to bear. I couldn't be the person your grandfather wanted me to be, so I chose a different path. As Carl's story unfolded, Ethan felt as if he were seeing his family and himself through new eyes. The pressure to succeed, the suffocating expectations, the fear of failure, it all took on a new meaning. But all these years, Ethan whispered, you've been out here watching us? A sad smile played at the corners of Carl's mouth. Not always, but enough to know that you needed this wake-up call as much as I did all those years ago. Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Angry voices, the sound of a scuffle. Carl was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between Ethan and the door. The door burst open, revealing a group of men, the same street thugs they'd encountered earlier in the week. Their leader, a hulking figure with a scarred face, sneered as he spotted Ethan. Well, look what we have here. The little rich boy and his guardian angel. Ethan struggled to his feet, ignoring the protest of his aching body. What do you want? The leader's eyes glittered with malice. We've got unfinished business, you and I. Thought you could play hero, did you? Time to learn what happens to heroes in our world. Carl stepped forward, his stance protective. Walk away. This isn't a fight you want. For a moment, it seemed the leader might back down. Then, with a snarl, he lunged forward. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan's world narrowed to a blur of fists and fury. He fought with a desperation born of survival, no longer the pampered rich kid, but a man fighting for his life. Carl was a whirlwind beside him, years of street-honed instincts coming to the fore. As the fight raged on, Ethan found himself back-to-back with Carl. In that moment, a wordless understanding passed between them. They were family, bound not just by blood, but by shared experience. With a final, coordinated effort, they managed to drive the attackers back. The leader, nursing a bloody nose, glared at them with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. This isn't over, he spat, before retreating with his battered crew. As the adrenaline faded, Ethan sagged against the wall, his body screaming in protest. Carl looked at him, a hint of pride in his eyes. You did good, kid. You're tougher than I gave you credit for. Ethan managed a weak smile. I had a good teacher. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Maya, her eyes wide with concern. What happened? Are you both all right? As they reassured her, Ethan's mind raced. In less than a day, he was due to return to his old life. But how could he go back, knowing what he knew now? The world he'd left behind seemed like a distant dream, disconnected from the harsh realities he'd experienced. Carl seemed to sense his turmoil. "You've got a decision to make, Ethan. The week's almost up. What are you going to do?" Ethan looked around the room, at Carl, his long-lost uncle, at Maya, who'd shown him the true meaning of resilience, at the door beyond which Ella lay, fighting her own battles. Then he thought of his father, waiting for him in a world that now felt alien. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know one thing. I can't go back to being the person I was before." Carl nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the hardest part of a journey is deciding where it ends. As night fell over the city, Ethan stood at a crossroads, literally and figuratively. To his left lay the path back to his old life of privilege and comfort. To his right, the uncertain future he'd glimpsed in the past week. With a deep breath, he made his choice. The journey wasn't over yet. The Donovan mansion loomed before Ethan, its pristine facade a stark contrast to the gritty world he'd left behind. He stood at the gate, his tattered clothes and unkempt appearance a testament to the week he'd endured. With a deep breath, he pressed the intercom. "Yes." The crisp voice of the family butler crackled through the speaker. "It's Ethan. I'm home." A pause. Then the gate swung open with a metallic groan. Ethan trudged up the manicured driveway, each step heavy with the weight of his experiences. The front door opened before he reached it, revealing James Donovan's imposing figure. "Welcome back, son." James's voice was cool, his eyes scanning Ethan's disheveled state. "I trust you've learned your lesson." Ethan met his father's gaze, a newfound strength in his stance. "I've learned more than you could imagine, Dad." James's brow furrowed. "Clean yourself up. We'll talk in my study." As Ethan showered, the hot water a luxury he'd never truly appreciated before, his mind raced. How could he explain the profound changes he'd undergone? How could he tell his father about Carl, cleaned and dressed in familiar, expensive clothes that now felt alien on his skin? Ethan made his way to the study. James sat behind his massive desk, a glass of scotch at his elbow. "Well," James's tone was expectant. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Ethan took a seat, his posture straight, eyes clear. "I'm sorry, Dad. Not for what you think, but for who I was before. I was blind, selfish, and completely disconnected from reality." James leaned back, surprise flickering across his face. "Go on." "This week, it changed me. I've seen things, experienced things that I never knew existed. I've met people who have nothing, yet give everything." Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. "And I've learned the truth about our family." James's hand tightened on his glass. "What are you talking about?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I met Uncle Carl." The study fell silent, save for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. James's face drained of color, his composure cracking. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Carl died years ago." Ethan shook his head. "No, Dad, he's alive. He's been living on the streets all this time." James stood abruptly, pacing the room. This is absurd. Carl's dead. I identified his body myself. He faked his death." Ethan pressed on. "He couldn't handle the pressure, the expectations. So he left it all behind." James whirled on Ethan, anger and disbelief warring in his eyes. "And you expect me to believe this fantastical story? That my dead brother has been living as a homeless man all these years? I can prove it." Ethan pulled out his phone, bringing up a photo he'd taken of Carl. "Look." James snatched the phone, his hands trembling as he stared at the image. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a maelstrom of emotions: shock, anger, grief. "Where is he?" James's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's still out there, Dad, living on the streets. But there's more you need to know." Over the next hour, Ethan recounted his experiences, meeting Carl, Maya, and Ella, the challenges they faced, the lessons he'd learned. As he spoke, James's anger gave way to a mix of pride and sorrow. "You've changed," James said softly when Ethan finished. "I can see it in your eyes." Ethan nodded. "I have. And I can't go back to who I was before. Dad, we have so much, and there are people out there with nothing. We have to do something." James was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right. But first I need to see Carl." The streets seemed different now as Ethan led his father through the city's underbelly. James, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, looked out of place among the grime and desperation. They found Carl in the abandoned factory, huddled around a fire with Maya and Ella. As they approached, Carl's eyes widened in recognition. "James." His voice was a mix of fear and longing. The brothers stood face to face, decades of separation hanging between them. Then, in a sudden movement, James pulled Carl into a fierce embrace. "You idiot," James choked out. "Why didn't you come to me?" Carl's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I couldn't. I was ashamed, lost. It was easier to stay dead." As the brothers reconnected, Ethan turned his attention to Maya and Ella. The little girl's condition had improved, but they still looked worn and weary. "What happens now?" Maya asked, her voice tinged with worry. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Now we help. All of us." Over the next few hours, plans were made. James, his business acumen kicking in, began outlining a program to provide housing and job training for the homeless. Carl, with his street knowledge, offered insights on the most pressing needs. "We can't save everyone," James cautioned, "but we can make a difference." As night fell, they prepared to leave the factory. Carl hesitated at the entrance. I don't know if I can go back," he admitted. "That world, it's not mine anymore." James placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Then we'll build a new world, together." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The Donovan Foundation for Urban Renewal was established, with Ethan at its helm. Maya and Ella were set up in a comfortable apartment, with Maya training to become a social worker. Carl, still uncomfortable with the trappings of wealth, chose to live simply but worked closely with the foundation, bridging the gap between the streets and the boardroom. One evening, as Ethan was leaving the foundation's new offices, he found Carl waiting for him. "There's something I need to tell you," Carl said, his expression serious. "Something I should have said before." They walked to a nearby park, the city lights twinkling around them. Carl took a deep breath. "I've been watching over you, Ethan, all these years, from the shadows." Ethan stopped, stunned. "What? How?" Carl's eyes were distant, lost in memories. "I couldn't completely abandon the family, so I kept tabs on you, on James. I saw you growing up, saw you starting to lose your way. When James came up with this crazy idea to teach you a lesson, I made sure I'd be there." The implications of Carl's words washed over Ethan. "You orchestrated our meeting, the whole week." Carl shook his head. "Not all of it. I just made sure I was in the right place at the right time. The rest, your experiences, your growth, that was all you, kid." Ethan's mind reeled. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you deserve the truth, and because I want you to understand that family, real family, never truly leaves you. Even when you think you're alone, there's always someone watching out for you." As they continued walking, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The anger and confusion of the past weeks melted away, replaced by a profound gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Carl nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "You did good, kid. You did good." The following day, Ethan stood before the board of Donovan Industries, outlining his plans for the foundation. James watched from the head of the table, pride evident in his eyes. As Ethan concluded his presentation, a hush fell over the room. Then, slowly, applause began to build. James stood, addressing the board. "My son has shown us a new path forward, one that combines profit with purpose, wealth with compassion. I propose we allocate significant resources to support this initiative." The vote was unanimous. Later, as father and son stood on the balcony of the Donovan penthouse, overlooking the city they were working to change, James turned to Ethan. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "I thought I was teaching you a lesson, but in reality, you taught me one." Ethan shook his head. "We both learned, Dad, and we're both better for it." James nodded, his gaze distant. "You know, when I sent you out there, I never imagined. I never thought you'd find Carl, or that it would change our lives so profoundly." Ethan smiled, a hint of his old mischief returning. "Maybe losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me." James chuckled, clapping Ethan on the back. "To us, son, the best thing that happened to us." As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow across the skyline, Ethan felt a sense of purpose he'd never known before. The week that had started as a punishment had become a gift, one that would shape not only his future, but the futures of countless others. He thought of Carl, out there somewhere in the city, still more comfortable on the streets than in a mansion. Of Maya and Ella, embarking on a new life filled with hope. Of the countless others they had yet to help. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now, Ethan knew he had the strength, the compassion, and the family to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As night fell, the city lights flickered to life, a constellation of human perseverance and possibility. Ethan Donovan, once lost in privilege, now stood ready to light the way for others. The transformation was complete, but the story, his story, their story, was far from over.